"I can't watch you marry her," my best friend said. Then he pressed play on a video I was never supposed to see. When my fiancé saw who sent it to me. The night before everything collapsed did not feel dramatic at first. It felt crowded and loud in a quiet way, the kind of noise that comes from too many unfinished tasks stacked in your head. I had just come back from the venue after another argument about table placements and lighting angles. The planner kept insisting small details mattered. Rachel agreed with her in that polite tone she used when she wanted someone on her side. I nodded through it because nodding was easier than reopening conversations that never really ended. When I got home, my phone buzzed again. Lucas, my best friend since we were teenagers. We had grown up on the same street, shared the same dumb ambitions, crashed on each other's couches during breakups, job losses, and bad decisions. He had been quieter lately, but I chalked that up to work stress and the fact that weddings tend to rearrange friendships in ways no one talks about. He asked if we could meet. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. I told him I was exhausted and suggested the morning. He replied almost immediately, saying it could not wait and that he would explain in person. That alone was enough to put a knot in my stomach. Lucas was not impulsive. When he pushed, it usually meant something had already gone wrong. We met at a small parking lot behind a closed grocery store a few blocks from my place. It was one of those leftover spots from an older part of town, poorly lit and mostly forgotten. Lucas arrived before me. His car engine was still running, headlights on, as if he had not decided whether he was staying or fleeing. He looked different, not just tired, stripped down. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, like he had been holding a decision in his mouth for too long and it was starting to hurt. He did not greet me the way he normally did. No joke, no comment about the absurdity of meeting like this. He just nodded and gestured for me to sit on the hood of my car instead of getting inside. That should have been my first real warning. He told me he could not watch me marry Rachel. He said it flatly, without build-up, as if stating a weather report. I waited for the explanation that usually follows a sentence like that, the clarification that turns it into concern or advice. It did not come. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. I remember thinking this was about cold feet, or maybe something he had overheard, some harmless misunderstanding that would turn into an awkward laugh later. I even felt annoyed for a second. The timing felt cruel. Weddings compress time until everything feels urgent, and this felt like unnecessary chaos injected into an already packed week. Lucas unlocked his phone with shaking hands. He did not look at me while he scrolled. He pressed play and then finally raised his eyes, not to watch the screen but to watch my face. The video was short, less than a minute. It was recorded indoors, close and slightly angled, like someone trying to be discreet but failing. The lighting was familiar, too familiar. I recognized the corner of the room almost immediately, the neutral wall color we had picked together, the framed photo that had not been hung yet and was still leaning against the bookshelf. Rachel was in the frame. She was not alone. What mattered was not just what was happening, but how comfortable she looked while it was happening. There was no hesitation in her movements, no sense of being caught off guard. She spoke calmly, casually, as if discussing plans rather than crossing a line. At one point she glanced directly at the camera, not startled, not confused, fully aware. The video ended before my mind caught up. I did not react the way movies suggest people react in moments like this. There was no explosion of anger, no dramatic denial. It felt more like my internal timeline had been quietly edited without my permission. Events I thought were fixed suddenly became unreliable. Conversations from the last few months replayed themselves in a different tone. Lucas started talking, fast and messy, trying to explain context, timing, his own role. His words blurred together. I held up my hand, not because I needed silence, but because I needed him to stop adding layers before I understood the first one. I asked him how long. He answered honestly, which I appreciated more than any apology. Long enough for it not to be a mistake. I asked him why he was showing me now. He said because the wedding was tomorrow, and because if he did not do it now, he never would. That part landed harder than the video. I drove home alone. Lucas did not follow me. He did not ask to. That restraint made everything worse. Rachel was in the living room when I arrived, surrounded by half-packed bags and printed schedules. She looked up, smiled, and asked if I had remembered to email the officiant. The normality of the question felt surreal, like someone asking about the weather while a building burned behind them. I told her we needed to talk. Not in the tone of an ultimatum, but not casually either. She read it instantly. Rachel was very good at reading shifts and atmosphere. She muted the television, set her phone down carefully, and waited. I did not ease into it. I told her Lucas had shown me a video. Her expression changed, but not the way I expected. There was no shock, no confusion. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear but in calculation, as if she were scanning for damage rather than escape routes. She asked me which video. That question answered more than anything else could have. I told her the rest anyway, that I knew what I saw, that explanations would need to match reality if they were going to matter at all. She did not deny it. She did not apologize either. She asked me why Lucas would do something like that. She asked what he wanted. She asked how long he had been planning to sabotage us. The way she framed it was precise. The problem, in her version, was not what happened. It was who exposed it. That was when the anger finally showed up, but it was not loud. It settled into place, heavy and deliberate. I told her that focusing on the messenger instead of the message was not going to work this time. She stood up and started pacing, hands moving as she spoke, building a narrative in real time. She talked about pressure, about stress, about how close we were to the wedding, and how everything felt overwhelming. She talked about Lucas crossing boundaries, about misunderstandings, about moments being taken out of context. I listened, but something had shifted. The words no longer filled the space the way they used to. They floated, detached from consequence. At one point, she stopped pacing and looked at me directly. She asked what I planned to do. That was the first time I realized she was afraid of exposure, not loss. I told her I did not know yet. That answer frustrated her more than any accusation could have. She liked control. Even conflict, when structured, could be managed. Uncertainty could not. She asked if I had shown the video to anyone else. I said no. She asked if Lucas still had it. I said yes. She asked if he had sent it to himself, backed it up, shared it. I asked her if that was really her priority right now. She did not answer. The rest of the night unfolded in fragments. We talked. We argued. We paused. At no point did the conversation return to a place that resembled what we had before. The trust was not cracked. It was removed. I slept on the couch. Not as a gesture, as a practical decision. Sleep felt necessary, even if rest was impossible. In the early hours of the morning, while the apartment was quiet and my phone remained untouched on the table, one thing became clear. The video was not the beginning of the problem. It was proof that the problem had been growing in plain sight. And whatever came next would not be small. Morning arrived without permission. Light crept through the blinds and landed on the living room wall, outlining the mess we had been ignoring for weeks. Boxes half-packed, garment bags stacked against the door, the evidence of a future that assumed cooperation. I sat up on the couch feeling like I had slept inside someone else's life. Rachel was already awake. I could hear her moving around in the bedroom, opening drawers, closing them softly, as if volume alone could influence outcomes. The normal rhythm of preparation continued, and that unsettled me more than shouting would have. I left the apartment before she could turn the morning into another controlled discussion. I did not announce it. I just grabbed my keys and walked out. Lucas answered his phone immediately. He sounded like he had not slept either. We agreed to meet again, this time somewhere public, somewhere boring enough to keep emotions contained. A 24-hour cafe near an office park. Fluorescent lighting, burnt coffee, no atmosphere to hide inside. When I arrived, Lucas was already there, hunched over a mug he had not touched. His hands were wrapped around it like it was the only solid thing in reach. He looked relieved when he saw me, which told me he had been expecting anger instead. I did not waste time. I told him I needed the whole story, not a version that made him feel better about surviving it. He nodded. He did not argue. That was new. He started at a point I would not have chosen. Months back, before the engagement party, before the deposits, before everything solidified. He said Rachel had started confiding in him under the excuse of concern. She framed it as worry about me, about how distant I had become, about how pressure from work and planning had turned me into someone difficult to reach. At first, he listened the way friends listen when they think they are helping. He said he tried to defend me, tried to contextualize things, tried to suggest communication instead of complaint. Rachel agreed with him every time. Then she came back again. The conversations shifted slowly. She began positioning herself as someone trapped between obligation and disappointment. She talked about emotional neglect, about feeling invisible. She asked Lucas if he had noticed changes in me too. She planted questions that implied answers. Lucas admitted he should have shut it down earlier. He said he convinced himself that being present was the responsible thing to do, that stepping away would leave Rachel isolated and escalate things at home. He framed his involvement as damage control, which I recognized as the first lie people tell themselves when they are already sliding. The first boundary crossed did not involve touch. It involved agreement. He stopped pushing back. He started validating. From there, everything else followed with less resistance than he expected. I asked him why he did not come to me. He said Rachel made sure he believed that would make things worse. She told him I was already overwhelmed and that any confrontation would cause me to shut down. She framed secrecy as protection. That part made my stomach turn, not because it was clever, but because it worked. I asked him about the video. He told me it was not meant to exist. It was recorded during a conversation that had already gone too far, where Rachel was outlining what would happen once the wedding was over. She spoke openly about control, about expectations shifting, about how marriage would stabilize things financially and socially. Lucas recorded it because something about the certainty in her voice frightened him. He said it stopped sounding like a relationship and started sounding like a strategy. He never intended to show me. He intended to keep it as insurance, a reminder that he was not imagining things. Then the wedding date approached, and the weight of silence became heavier than the consequences of truth. I asked him who else knew. He shook his head. He said Rachel had been careful. Conversations were segmented. Narratives were tailored. Different people knew different versions of the same story. No one had the full picture. That explained things I had dismissed before. The sideways looks at gatherings. The subtle shifts in tone when I entered a room. Friends who suddenly seemed reserved around me, as if bracing for something. I asked him about money. Lucas hesitated before answering, which told me more than his words. He said Rachel handled most of the wedding payments. Not because I was uninterested, but because she insisted on efficiency. She positioned herself as capable, organized, reliable. I let her. I trusted her. He told me she had complained about financial imbalance, about how marriage would justify sacrifices she felt she had already made. She spoke about leverage without using the word, about how shared assets would simplify things, about how commitment changes dynamics. Hearing it laid out that way drained something out of me. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was logistical. When I left the cafe, my phone was full of missed notifications. Rachel had called twice. She had sent messages ranging from neutral check-ins to sharp questions about where I was. The escalation was predictable now that I knew what to look for. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I went to the office. It was a Saturday. The building was mostly empty, which gave me space to think without interruption. I logged into my accounts. I reviewed shared documents. I checked dates, permissions, access points. I was not looking for drama. I was looking for alignment between what I thought was happening and what actually was. Discrepancies appeared quickly, small ones, enough to suggest patterns. I went home in the afternoon. Rachel was waiting. She had changed outfits twice, which told me she had been rehearsing different versions of the same conversation. She asked where I had been. I told her I met Lucas. Her posture changed. Not dramatically, just enough to register. She asked what he said. I told her he explained his role and hers. I told her I understood now that this was not a single decision, but a series of choices that built on each other. She told me Lucas was manipulating me. She said he was projecting guilt and trying to redirect blame. She said the video was a violation of trust and that focusing on it instead of the relationship itself was irresponsible. I asked her why she had never told me she felt trapped. She said she had tried, many times, and that I never listened. I asked her to give an example. She provided generalities instead. I asked her if she believed I would still marry her if I knew everything. She paused before answering. That pause carried more information than her words. She said she believed commitment meant working through things, even uncomfortable ones. She said walking away days before a wedding would destroy more than just us. That was the moment I realized she was counting on external pressure to finish what manipulation had started. I told her I needed time. Not space in the dramatic sense, but time to verify things for myself. That request irritated her. Time meant uncertainty. Uncertainty meant loss of control. That evening, Lucas sent me additional messages. Screenshots of conversations that showed tone shifts I had missed before. Nothing sensational. Just enough to confirm consistency. By nightfall, I understood something that reframed everything. Rachel did not see herself as betraying me. She saw herself as managing outcomes. The wedding was not a celebration to her. It was a mechanism. And mechanisms, once exposed, do not survive intact. By the time the sun set that night, I no longer felt like someone reacting to events. I felt like someone standing still while everything else moved around me, revealing its shape as it passed. The wedding was less than 24 hours away, and for the first time since the engagement, that fact no longer felt heavy. It felt useful. Rachel believed the tension between us was temporary. I could tell by the way she adjusted her behavior, switching between concern and irritation depending on how quiet I stayed. She offered reassurance without apology, affection without vulnerability. Everything was calibrated to keep the structure intact. I did not challenge her. I let her believe the storm had peaked. That night, while she slept, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and reviewed everything I had avoided reviewing before. Contracts, email threads, shared calendars, the details that felt boring until they suddenly mattered. I was not searching for proof of betrayal anymore. That part was done. I was searching for exposure. The wedding contracts were clear. Deposits were non-refundable after a certain point, but only if cancellation came from mutual agreement or no-show. Certain clauses shifted liability depending on cause. I realized quickly that Rachel had been careful to frame most decisions as joint while positioning herself as the executor. That distinction mattered more than she realized. I checked shared accounts. Funds had been moved, but not stolen, allocated in ways that assumed permanence. Honeymoon bookings tied to joint identity. Plans that only made sense if walking away felt impossible. Around 2 in the morning, Lucas sent me another message. Not evidence. Context. He told me Rachel had been unusually calm earlier that day, almost relieved. She had told him she believed I would come around, once the fear of embarrassment outweighed the anger. That sentence clarified everything. I did not sleep much. When I did, it was shallow and fragmented. Morning arrived quickly, loud with notifications and movement. The apartment filled with activity. Rachel's sister arrived with garment bags. The hairstylist showed up early. The living room turned into a staging area. I moved through it quietly, answering questions with minimal words, doing nothing to suggest disruption. Rachel watched me closely, reading my neutrality as progress. She smiled more. Her voice softened. She touched my arm when others were around. I played my role. Before we left for the venue, I told her I needed to stop by the office briefly to pick up documents for the officiant. That was true, just not the whole truth. She hesitated but agreed. Time pressure works both ways. At the office, I made 2 calls. One to the venue coordinator, one to the officiant. I did not dramatize anything. I explained that there were unresolved issues regarding consent and representation. I asked what flexibility existed if the ceremony were paused rather than canceled. The answers were careful but informative. I arrived at the venue later than planned. Guests were already gathering. Music played softly. The place looked exactly as it was supposed to. That struck me as ironic. Appearances had been handled perfectly. Substance had not. Rachel was in the dressing area when I found her. She looked stunning, which made the situation more surreal, not more difficult. She asked where I had been. I told her everything was on schedule. She relaxed. Lucas was not part of the wedding party in the traditional sense, but he was there. He kept his distance. That was intentional. Visibility without proximity. As the ceremony approached, Rachel pulled me aside. She told me she needed reassurance. She said uncertainty was cruel. She asked if I was still in this. I told her I was present. That answer satisfied her. When the ceremony began, I stood in place and listened. The words about commitment, partnership, trust passed through the air without resistance. Guests smiled. Phones were raised discreetly. The performance unfolded exactly as rehearsed. Then came the pause. The officiant asked if there was anything that should prevent the marriage from proceeding. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was expectant. I spoke calmly. I said there were facts that needed to be acknowledged before consent could be considered informed. I did not accuse. I stated. Rachel turned toward me slowly. Her expression did not collapse. It hardened. I referenced the video. I referenced documented conversations. I referenced misrepresentation of intent. I made it clear this was not an emotional outburst, but a procedural objection. Gasps rippled through the room. Rachel tried to speak, but the officiant raised a hand. Procedure mattered now. She accused Lucas immediately. She called it sabotage. She framed it as betrayal by a third party rather than disclosure of her own actions. Lucas stepped forward without invitation. He did not speak emotionally. He confirmed the authenticity of what I referenced and took responsibility for his involvement without minimizing hers. The room shifted. Rachel's family reacted first. Confusion turned into concern. Concern into confrontation. Questions were asked that could not be answered without revealing more. Rachel's control slipped in increments. Her voice rose. Her explanations contradicted each other. The story she had been telling different people collided in real time. The officiant called a halt. The ceremony did not end in shouting. It ended in suspension. No vows. No pronouncement. Just unresolved truth hanging in a room full of witnesses. Rachel tried to pull me aside. She asked if I understood what I was doing. She talked about consequences, about embarrassment, about permanence. I told her this was the first honest moment of the entire process. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time understood that the leverage she relied on was gone. Guests were escorted out gradually. The venue staff followed protocol. No scene, no spectacle, just an event that never completed. By evening, the narrative had already escaped the room. Messages arrived from friends asking what happened, from relatives offering support or demanding explanation. Rachel did not come home with me. That night, I sat alone in the apartment that still smelled faintly of preparation. The wedding did not happen, but its consequences had already begun, and they were irreversible. The morning after the ceremony that never finished arrived without ceremony of its own. No alarms, no rushing, no scheduled movement. Just light pressing through the windows and the realization that silence can feel heavier than noise when it is earned instead of accidental. The apartment was unchanged, but everything in it had lost relevance. Garment bags still hung from door frames. Printed seating charts remained taped to the fridge. Objects designed for a future that no longer existed do not disappear on their own. They wait. My phone did not stop vibrating. Messages stacked faster than I could read them. Some were confused, some supportive, some openly hostile. The event had already been edited by people who were not there. Narratives always spread faster than context. I did not correct anyone. Correction implies participation, and I was done participating in stories that were not mine. Rachel contacted me once that morning. A single message asking if we could talk privately and resolve things without involving anyone else. The phrasing was consistent with everything I had learned about how she operated. Control through isolation. Damage mitigation through silence. I did not respond. By noon, the legal consequences began to surface. The officiant sent documentation confirming the suspension of the ceremony due to unresolved objections. The venue coordinator followed with a breakdown of what deposits could be recovered and which ones were forfeited due to timing and cause. The numbers were not small. Rachel had assumed financial pressure would discourage interruption. Instead, it clarified responsibility. I forwarded everything to my attorney. That afternoon, Lucas came by. Not to apologize again, not to explain himself further. He came to return a spare key and confirm that he would step back from every shared social space we had. He understood that proximity would only complicate outcomes. That decision did not redeem him, but it acknowledged reality. Accountability does not require forgiveness to function. Rachel's parents called later that day, not together, separately. Her mother first, then her father an hour later. Their tones differed, but the content aligned. They wanted to understand what had happened and whether it could be undone quietly. I told them what I told everyone else who asked directly. The truth had already entered public space. Quiet was no longer an option. That was when the shift became visible. Support withdrew. Not dramatically, not with confrontation. It withdrew through distance. Plans were canceled. Assistance paused. Rachel's parents did not defend her publicly. They did not condemn her either. They simply stopped insulating her from consequences. That change mattered more than anger would have. 2 days later, Rachel showed up at the apartment while I was at work. The building security notified me. She requested access to retrieve personal belongings. I authorized it. Supervision was required. Boundaries were enforced without discussion. She did not look defeated. She looked recalculating. She asked again for a private conversation. She framed it as closure. I declined. Closure implies mutual participation in meaning-making. What happened did not require interpretation. It required distance. Over the next week, the fallout moved through social circles with varying speeds. Some friends reached out with apologies for believing partial stories. Others stayed silent, which was information in itself. The friend group did not fracture. It realigned. That process was uncomfortable but clarifying. The legal process moved forward steadily. Shared accounts were disentangled. Contracts were reviewed. Responsibility was allocated based on documented intent rather than emotion. Rachel contested certain points, but documentation favors consistency, not confidence. Her arguments weakened as patterns emerged. At no point did I feel victorious. That surprised me. I had expected relief or satisfaction. What I felt instead was absence. The removal of constant negotiation. The end of performing stability. Rachel attempted one final maneuver near the end of the second week. She contacted my employer, not to accuse, but to imply instability. The attempt failed because implication without evidence dissolves quickly when scrutinized. The effort backfired. It added another data point to an already established pattern. That was the last time she tried to redirect outcomes through external pressure. By the third week, the narrative had settled into something closer to accuracy. Not because people suddenly became fair, but because sustained contradiction collapses under its own weight. Rachel's version of events required too many exceptions to remain intact. Lucas moved out of state shortly after. New job, new start. He did not ask to stay in touch. That was appropriate. I moved apartments. Not out of necessity, but because environments remember things even when people try not to. The new place was smaller and quieter. It felt earned. Months passed without incident. Life did not reset. It restructured. Some friendships deepened. Others disappeared. I learned which connections were conditional and which were resilient. That information was not comfortable, but it was valuable. Rachel resurfaced once more through a mutual acquaintance. She was struggling financially. Wedding expenses had not been her only gamble. I declined involvement. Consequences are not punishments. They are outcomes. Looking back, the most unsettling realization was not that the betrayal happened. It was how easily it blended into normalcy while it was ongoing. The warning signs were not hidden. They were contextualized away by trust and momentum. The video did not end the relationship. It ended the illusion that the relationship had been mutual. The wedding did not fail. It revealed. And once revealed, nothing needed to be destroyed. It simply could not continue.